Welcome everyone to our 6th event in our Women in Salesforce series. For those of you that might be new to our events, our mission is to connect, inspire, and develop the careers of women working in the ecosystem in order to make technology a more diverse and inclusive working environment, with a vision to empower our community members to be change agents in the world of tech. This evening, we're joined by Jennifer Lynn Schneider, who is a repeat Dreamforce speaker, as well as QSA, solution architect, and sales and marketing strategist at Qualified, as well as Heather Negley, a decorated Salesforce consultant and mentor, as well as the author of the much anticipated book, Salesforce Consultant's Guide. Both speakers are incredibly experienced and successful Salesforce professionals who will be discussing topics on how the pandemic has influenced how we connect with customers, as well as best practices for client management. Over to you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara, for that great introduction. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. We've got a really good topic today to kind of go over. I'm going to throw some things at you guys, and I expect some conversation. I've got some new ideas and some different ways of thinking. And so there's going to be some great chances for all of us to be able to get some input. My session specifically is on how the pandemic, or has the pandemic, impacted how we connect with customers. I think we can all say safely that that is a yes, but we're going to talk a little bit about specifically today the business process for B2B companies and how that impacts us in our daily work. Also, definitely connect with me if you guys haven't already. They're on LinkedIn or Twitter. I love meeting new people, sharing best practices, networking with you, strong, wonderful women in tech. So please don't hesitate to reach out. So what's our agenda look like? I've got about 4 basic topics, and underneath each topic, you kind of see this gray area here of like what we saw, why it doesn't work. These are the places that I really encourage you guys to start putting those questions in the chat. I'm going to share some basic ideas, but I want your feedback, good or bad or indifferent. Hey, I don't agree with this at all, or absolutely, and I think this should be included. So definitely make this interactive, put those questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the stats of 2020, some of those predictions that were made by the industry of what would happen when we first started to learn the pandemic. And then we're going to look at what we actually saw in 2021. We're going to tie all of that to that traditional B2B business model. And I'm going to showcase that model. So those of you that aren't super familiar with the business process, this is a model that's been around for, I'm going to age myself. I was doing this model about 17 years ago when I started as BDR. And we're going to talk about why it might not be working anymore. And I'm going to showcase a new hybrid model. Some of the best B2B companies are utilizing this hybrid model and seeing amazing success in 2021 and forward. We're going to consider that shift. So I'm going to challenge you guys to consider, how could I help shift that in my company? And how do I start thinking about this digital first world? We're then going to talk about all-bounding. You may have heard of it. There's a ton of buzzwords. Give it a week. We'll find some new ones. That's what we do. But all-bounding is a team approach to selling, and we'll cover that briefly as well. So first, I'm going to shoot some stats at you. So feel free to take a look at some of these reports I pulled up. They're from 2020. You've got some links below. I'm sure we'll share the deck at some point where you guys can take a look. But 60% of event professionals changed an event to virtual format due to the impact of COVID-19. Pretty obvious. I actually would have expected that to be a little bit higher. All we're trying to do at this point is establish a rhythm of what we were seeing and how we were reacting to 2020. So we know that has definitely impacted our events, which impacts our in-person conversations, our conferences, our networking. All of this becomes affected. And in that same breath, 97% of event marketers believe that hybrid events will be more prevalent in 2021 than previously. Now, again, these stats were predicted in 2020, and I think they're pretty spot on. We've learned about hybrid events. In fact, if any of you were at the Partner Learning Camp with Salesforce, I actually was on a panel to talk about hybrid events, the successes and the struggles, the frustrations of hybrid events. And so we have to think differently. And this just kind of showcases what was predicted. And the last metric I'm going to throw at you guys today is 60% of virtual event organizers use social media to drive registration. Now, if that's the case, where are we driving them from social media to? probably our website or a landing page of some sort. So we start to think about this area that we play in as marketers, our website, our landing pages, our events, webinars, registration links. And that's just one small bubble of our business process. None of this right now has necessarily talked about our sales business process, hasn't talked about how we're collecting net new leads or how we're nurturing known leads and contacts and how that flows through our system. But it all has one common thread. We're meeting less in person. We're interacting with each other digitally as a society even more. And we need to be able to find a way to be able to communicate very efficiently because everyone else is doing the same thing. I don't know about you, but I've been overloaded with so much content that I'm starting to get a real short attention span. We're going to cover that a little bit later in the presentation too. So that's great. Great, Jen. Thanks for the metrics. We all kind of knew that. So what are some of the changes we have actually seen? So again, in 2021, we see that in-person events have become very exclusive, right? We have small attendees, we have unique attendees. Not everyone has the capabilities to attend these events. We're seeing them more local, community, and definitely a hybrid. So we're bringing in a technological component where we might have 25 in-person attendees, but we've opened it up to things like Zoom or other platforms. We've also seen a lot more hybrid platforms come to life in 2021. We've also seen websites becoming more important than ever before in the B2B space. Now, this was absolutely 100% true in B2C. Fantastically true. But B2B companies have been known for their outdated and very difficult websites for a very long time because their focus for lead generation was in person, in sales, in conferences, in trade shows, very specific to the industry. Now, I talked about this a little earlier today, but we definitely see content overload. Everyone's doing webinars. Everyone has blogs and content. We had a lot of time to do a lot of things. And our attention spans are getting shorter. Who's going to grab my attention, right? So if you're a company and you're trying to pull that person to you versus their competitors, what messaging do you have that's going to pull me away from the rest of the people that are screaming at my face? Short, concise, and on-topic messaging is always going to get you there. We've also seen broken end-user digital journeys. What the heck does that mean? We've seen things come in off of a web form. We've seen things come to a landing page. We've used social media. We've tried to execute all of these things, and we see them breaking because we haven't necessarily pulled in both our marketing and sales team, our CRM, our tech stack to support all of the things that we need to do. We've kind of been shooting from the hip because we needed to navigate. We need to change the way that we communicate. And from that, we're seeing a lot of loose ends for our end users. They're not getting a nice full journey from, hey, I just met you. I understand your story. You've nurtured me. I'm talking to a person and now purchasing your product. And lastly, outbound email efforts. These guys have to be more strategical and targeted. You've seen a huge uptick in things like outreach, high velocity sales, sales loft, a lot of outbound efforts from our sales teams who are not traveling as much as they used to be. So now they have to pick up the slack and be great with their messaging. And we look at that and we say, well, how can we rein those people in? We're sending emails. Isn't that good enough? Well, we're not looking at clicks. We're not looking at opens. We need to look at actions. So by putting some CTAs and again, bringing those folks to your website, which is now your store, we can start to see some results. And we're going to talk about that full circle change of approach. So let's take a look at this traditional B2B model. This is a model that, again, has been around for a very long time. So those of you not in sales, this might be something completely new to you. Those that have been in operations and sales or MarTech may be all too familiar with this process. But we usually split it up between our inbound SDRs and our outbound BDRs. They have a ton of acronyms, ISRs, OSRs, QSRs, goes on and on. But the main logistic is this: we've broken up our website traffic from all of our other communications. We've had website traffic in the past has mostly been form completions. And at that point, it's a round robin assignment. Hey, somebody comes to the form, we're going to treat everyone fairly. We're going to respond to that maybe a day later, maybe 24 hours, 48, 72, maybe it just got lost. Maybe we get a meeting booked. We're going to email back and forth for 2-3 weeks before that happens. And finally, we get a meeting book. Oh, they're not even a fit for us, or they are. And we finally get a qualification meeting to ask additional information. This could have been 2 to 4 to 6 weeks of prospecting in this traditional B2B model before that opportunity even gets created, before we're even bringing any revenue into the system. Now, with our outbound efforts, you see here that they're separated again, which doesn't make a ton of sense. We talked a little bit earlier about, we've got all these different tactics, these different vehicles that we're trying to outreach to people that worked in the past, but now we've got to centralize that. We've got to use all of our tactics, bring them to one place, bring them into our organization, and follow a consistent business process. But in the past, our outbound emails, cold calls, those are rough, LinkedIn, all sorts of things like that. Even our marketing automation nurture could probably fall into this, right? And here we're emailing and we're sending out all this information. We're hoping somebody picks it up, somebody gets interested in what we have to say. We might even bombard them for 3 months before finally they say, oh, I'm either going to unsubscribe or say something. It's not really the experience we want. And now that we all get much more content from a ton of other individuals and competitors in the space, this can be really overwhelming. But again, you're going to see the same type of methodology here where the prospect will respond. Maybe they'll engage, maybe they'll click a link or they'll respond to the email. Now we're going to, again, email back and forth and try to get a meeting set up. And then we're going to try to qualify them. And again, 2 to 4 weeks could possibly, or even longer for larger enterprises, could happen before we even get an opportunity created and move it through the funnel. Now, this worked before because we had a lot of in-person touches in between these tactics, right? I'm going to send that outbound email. Then I'm going to go ahead and give them a call and say, hey, I'm going to be at that conference next week. Let's meet up. And of course, everybody loves a free beer or a free coffee. So they agreed to the meeting. They've met you, you've got a personal relationship. A couple of weeks later, you send out another email. They don't answer. You go on LinkedIn because you connected at the event. Now they're talking to you again, and you offer to maybe be in the area and talk to them some more. So we've had these in-person touches to try to help push this model through, which is why it had been successful in the past. However, we're missing those pieces. And so now all of us as humans are getting bombarded with emails and cold calls and all of these things. And we're not making those relationships unless they're digital. And so it's broken. We'll talk a little bit more about why this might not work anymore. Your competitor is knocking on your back door, right? If I have to wait 2 days or a day for you to get back to me, I mean, we are goldfish, right? I want my answers now. If I have to wait even 2 hours and my boss wants an answer from me, guess what? I'm going to check out your competitor's website and see if they're going to talk to me. I don't have time to wait for your email. We talked about those personal relationships, right? They're becoming largely digital. Even here in the Trailblazer and Ohana and Women in Tech community, a lot of us haven't even met face-to-face, and we're building those relationships, but it's just not quite the same sometimes, especially in the purchase and buying behavior than it was to be able to meet that person in person. A big thing and a big key that we miss with the traditional model is that we aren't engaging that person when they are interested. They came to us. Think of it as a store. I'm going to walk into your store and I'm looking, I really want this coffee. It's so good. I love coffee, by the way. And I want to buy this coffee. I mean, I'm really interested in this coffee, but there's nobody here. Like no one at all in the store. And then I was, okay, I can write a note. And I'll write a note next to the coffee and then you guys can email me back and we'll talk about it in a week. It sounds absurd, but it's the same exact thing that we're doing when we're filling out those forms or we're leaving those individuals with time in between from the time they were engaged and now they're not engaged anymore. I already walked across the street, found some other coffee, wasn't as good, but at least I got a conversation, I learned something and I made the purchase over there. And then I think we've already talked about this, just less in-person touch points. And those can really make a difference in that traditional model. So let's take a look at the hybrid model. The hybrid model brings all of your channels together. Digital marketing, website, email, phone, LinkedIn, your sales process, and some of those exclusive in-person and hybrid events. We bring it all into one place. We have one model, one business process that envelops our marketing, digital marketing, IT, CRM, and sales teams. We want to make sure we're having conversations with these individuals, whether that is still form fills and we're getting back to them within an hour, right? Maybe that's our new SLA. Whether we're pulling them to landing pages, whether we're using conversational marketing and chat to be able to actually talk to that person while they're on your site. There's a lot of things that we can do here to shorten that sales cycle. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We want to shorten this elongated sales cycle, become more digitally active, be there at the right time with the right buyer to have that conversation. That sales opportunity then comes much quicker, because if we engage with them when they're interested, we can ask them those qualifying questions. But that requires both marketing and sales to understand the business process and what questions to answer. Obviously, we're looking at a really wonderful halo here of a closed-won opportunity. Not everything's going to end up that way. But as you can see, we've left out all of this dead space that is really killing some of the larger B2B enterprises today by staying with that traditional model. So what I challenge you guys today is consider the shift. Whether you're SMB, whether you're B2B, maybe you're even B2C, how can you apply some of these methods internally, or at least start to get the conversation going? And we're going to talk a little bit about everybody. This isn't just a marketing or a sales thing. We need to get that Salesforce admin in here. We need to get those architects in here, right? Because we need to understand how our tech stack talks to each other. We need to understand how Salesforce is actually going to support from fields and process the things that we're doing as people are coming through. So the first thing, clean up your house, right? Get that CRM up to date. Make sure that if we're asking a qualifying question, that we have a field in Salesforce that captures that. And if that's a really important qualifying question, then it should be on every marketing form, in every chatbot experience. It should be, tailored to our digital ads that take us to a landing page that collect that information. Our enrichment tools should be geared in the same way to try to enrich that specific information. And our business process should be tailored to those specific fields. And that's what I mean by aligning that business model across all teams: sales, marketing, CRM, IT, website, and digital marketing, as well as events. A lot of times we leave out the CRM IT from this, or we're siloed, or we leave out sales. But if the foundation of our CRM, our sales cloud or service cloud does not support our business process, you now have data all over the place, and there's no way to tie this together. So we need to bring our data and our process into one platform or into multiple platforms that then all write to Salesforce. And that's kind of what I mean by saying add in tools that support this process. So once you've got your CRM figured out, you've done your whiteboarding, you agree that these are the things that we want to ask, this is our sales process, then ask what's missing. If we're having a hard time pushing people to our website, why? Is it because we lack digital marketing efforts? Have we not thought about utilizing CTAs in our outreach or our sales loft emails? What are we doing from a marketing nurture perspective? And are we all aligned that this happens when we push this individual to the site? Or maybe our website just needs some work, right? Or maybe we want to layer in a conversational marketing tool or an ABM tool to gain some more insights. But I always say to everybody, don't layer anything in until you clean your house first, right? Don't go buy a bunch of stuff at Target when you got a bunch of stuff already from Target that you haven't even opened, right? So make sure you clean up your house and get yourself set. And then the last piece of this is really just focusing on that website. That is your digital store. Remember that goofy coffee example I just made up, but it really resonates, right? Somebody comes in your store. You want to make sure you got somebody there to talk to them. They're showing engagement and interest right now. You should be there. So after we've done all this, we've kind of started to label this as what's called all-bounding. And we talk about celebrating as a team. Now, with that traditional business model came this whole, well, that's my lead. You can't talk to that lead. I talked to that lead 4 years ago at a conference and I bought him a beer. That's my lead, right? We've seen that all the time. Celebrate as a team. If someone is available, we need to have a conversation. We need to respond to that individual. So think about how your teams could shift to incentivize group team supports, like account teams, or, based on where they are in the sales funnel, we have a team that addresses those questions. And once we've qualified them to that, we can then move them over to another team. But think about the fact that we don't want to not reach out to someone just because we don't own them in Salesforce. The all bounding topic really focuses on reduction of lead to pipe conversion. We saw this long drawn out process and we shortened it up very quickly just because we have one objective in mind. We're going to move them to the website or a landing page, and we have a very specific business process that's going to handle them very quickly after they've engaged, while they're engaged. Your business process alignment for any solution architects and admins and IT, folks on the call right now, that's super important. We can create a business process, but if we do not support it with our tech stack, it's just going to fall apart. There's no reason to be putting things in spreadsheets and then paying a business analyst to upload them and all of this insane stuff that we've developed over the years. We need to make our systems talk to each other. And if we don't know how, we need to ask questions. And always use the campaign object. There's a little hint there. Pretty much all tech stack alignment in marketing and sales can be aligned using campaign management, which then of course is the only object that has both leads and contacts collectively related to each other, as well as opportunities. So that's where I would start. And then lastly, consider your website as a virtual event. Consider it as an event 24/7. It is a virtual event. Anytime someone comes to your site, they are engaged. They are looking for something. They want to know something. We spend all of our marketing times trying to get people to get excited, to ask questions. And we have this website and people come there and we're just like, we have a contact us form. How can we get more engagement on our website? Think about how maybe you are staffing it, or how are you creating that experience on your website today? I've added a whole bunch of things to think about. I probably ruffled a few feathers, but I'd love to take a couple of questions now. And of course, we're going to hear from Heather next as well. So we can always get some questions at the end. But I really appreciate you guys letting me have this time to bring this up to you today.
Thank you, Jen, so much. This has been, really eye-opening for me in particular. I can speak for the small team of us in the Salesforce practice here. We went over all of this stuff this morning with our CEO and founder, Matt, about the inbound versus outbound, and just, how communication has just radically shifted over the last, 2 years, and how it's been, it's been a long time coming, but just how the pandemic kind of, power boosted it. Taking the steps to adapt to that, and, about how we personally will implement changes, on both the broader scale and the little things that you have to do kind of to keep the plates all spinning. Yeah, I know, exactly what I'm talking about. At this time, we'll hand it over to Heather if you're ready, and keep things going.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Heather.
Thanks for inviting me to this. It's really great to be here. And I think I've seen a couple familiar faces in the meeting. So I'm glad that for that support as well. So a little bit about me. So I have spent the last 26 years of my career doing a little bit of everything. I've been in IT. I've been a researcher for the Congressional Research Service out of the Library of Congress. And I started off in journalism at US News and World Report and the Washington Post. So, but for the past 8 years, I've worked only in Salesforce delivery. And through that time, I've been on 30 plus Salesforce projects, which is a little bit crazy, but I think that, as you'll see in my presentation, that it's given me the opportunity to see patterns on Salesforce projects. I've done on technical and functional roles in all different industries. I have some Salesforce certs and PMP and stuff. Anyway, so if you're going to get one thing out of this presentation, I want you to have the realization and the epiphany that Salesforce projects have patterns, and you might think that you're going to be on a unique project because that's the way the salesperson has told you and they hand it off to you, but I can almost guarantee you that there's going to be a pattern in there. And if you learn to recognize the patterns, then you can use the tools in your consulting toolbox to make sure that that project is successful. So I have I looked through all of the projects that I've been on. I created a list of them, and I made up 7 archetypes because I found patterns in the ones that I've been on, and I'm going to teach you about 2 of the 7 that I have written about in my book that's coming out in March. So without further ado, The first one is called the Rube Goldberg project. And so for those of you who don't know what a Rube Goldberg machine is, it's an overly complex piece of machinery or equipment that performs something pretty simple. So in this example, which is made by Rube Goldberg, that's where it gets its name, this is a self-operating napkin. And the way that you tell if you are on a Rube Goldberg project is the first thing that you do is you ask if the org is new when you start the project, when you have the sales handoff. And if it's new, then that's called a greenfield project. And it's definitely not a Rube Goldberg project. But if they say, yeah, this is an org that has some other apps in it, then what you're going to try to find out is if there's technical debt in it. And what I mean by technical debt, I mean that there might be some Apex code in there that was written in a way that makes it hard to edit and add to. So if you look at this picture of this person with this hat on that wants to have a clock wipe his face, your project might have to actually interact with that hat. You know, that's technical debt. It's very hard to come into a project where there's a lot of technical debt. A lot of times you'll run into system limitations. Salesforce has things called governor limits and other kind of gatekeeper things that'll show up. And if you get yourself into a project that has that, then you'll see technical debt. You'll see that the solution is over-engineered, and you can tell obviously by this picture that this is over-engineered. Another example, just in real life, of something that's over-engineered is the Winchester Mystery House. You can Google that, and it's a house that this lady had people work on continuously for like 40 years because she was superstitious. And it's a crazy house. You can go on a tour of it in California. But anyway, so over-engineering, if you're on a project that's been over-engineered, you'll also see when you start talking about the solution, there'll be scope creep in the form of the design that comes out of it. And so anytime you have complexity on a project, there's going to be scope creep, and you shouldn't be surprised by it. You should expect it. But especially on these types of projects, the scope creep is going to come in with the design solution, particularly. And then, of course, there'll be rabbit holes. What I mean by rabbit holes is just that talking about something like this in a conversation is going to be really hard for people to do just verbally. And so you might be in a meeting trying to get requirements, and you might find that there's two people on the project that actually can have a conversation about this verbally, and everybody else is lost. And so they go down a rabbit hole. And so if that happens, then you have to try to defer the conversation and figure out where it fits in, if it fits in, and not waste time. Depending on the context of the meeting. So one of the things that you can do on this type of project is when you figure out that you really are on a Rube Goldberg project, is ask the client if they'd like to have a health check. And what a health check does, it's usually a separate project they pay for, and it can happen in parallel to your project, or you can pause your project and do it before your actual project. And it just is a total scan of the project, and it helps them find out what is the things they should be looking at in the org that are problematic. And a lot of times if they take the time to do that, then they'll end up getting a better app, and they'll end up spending less money. They might make other decisions in the sales cycle that can be completely different than the project that you're on. So health checks are always things to mention to a client if you find yourself in this situation. But if they don't have a health check and you are continuing down this road, you would ask yourself or ask the client, would adding this requirement make the solution overly complex? And you would try to find ways to minimize the complexity. If they have a requirement, you might ask them, is the feature better off somewhere else? It might be part of a process that's not connected to this Rube Goldberg machine necessarily, and it's a business process that they could do someplace else, maybe in a different app or a different org. And how could it fit into the systems design plan overall? So you have to make sure that what they're asking for it can fit into the overall solution. And if this is their overall solution, you want to try to help them understand that they have an overly complicated org that is hard to work in. So that's a Rube Goldberg project. And the next project is an Explorer project. I think Explorer projects are really fun projects to be on, to be honest with you, because they're with clients who really like to learn and kind of dream and think about the art of the possible. And that's really fun. One of the things about Salesforce projects is that they're usually around automation. And a lot of times people don't understand what automation means as a concept. And so there can be a lot of misconceptions about that. So you might have to take some time to explain automation to your client if you're on an Explorer project. And it might come up on other project types as well. So sometimes people don't want to do automation because they are reluctant, because they think that it might take over their position or their job and they don't want to change. But if you take some time to learn about the history of automation and then teach it to your client, then you can tell them things like, automation has been going on for 100 years at least. When we made the transition from the horse and buggy to the car, we no longer needed blacksmiths, but we needed people to work at gas stations and we needed mechanics. So it's never taken away jobs. It's changed the jobs, and it's actually added jobs, but the jobs have changed. And the same thing happened in the 80s when with banks, when they created ATMs. It didn't take away jobs. It's just the tellers moved into more client management positions where they interacted more with their customers. And you want to be able to work with machines, but machines have certain capabilities that they're just better at that humans aren't. So like they're good at rote tasks and calculations, but humans are really good at, creativity, judgment, synthesis, just to name a few. There's a lot of things that humans are better at than machines. And so you want to couple those things together, and overall that'll make the solution more efficient and more exciting and lead to better innovative solutions and ideas. So you want to make sure that when that comes up, you teach them a little bit about that, because what happens on an Explorer project is a client might come in and they're just starting their automation journey. And so they might not understand what you're even talking about. So it's a little bit like climbing a mountain where you have to lead them into the first stages of automation. And Salesforce calls this the crawl, walk, run approach. And it's really a good term to use when you're explaining it to them. You lead them up the mountain a little bit and they follow you. And then you have your first couple demos where you're teaching them the first parts of automation. You're teaching them, how the statuses change and the emails are automated and so on. And then it's like they're at the top of a mountain and they can see all the peaks in the mountain. And then their imagination takes off. And then suddenly they have like 20 more requirements, because they're racing into the future and they want to be explorers. And it's fun at that point, but that's at the point where you really have to teach them about crawl, walk, run and the evolution of, an automated process, and help them make decisions about what they really do want to automate and what makes sense to wait on. So one of the ways you can do this is with a minimum viable product. And you teach them that they need to start with the crawl phase before they go to the walk phase. And they don't need to automate everything. They should leave some things for human decision making, things that require judgment, and then decide if it's worth automating. So, and then you teach them the value of human decision making. And then also on this one, you have to be cut again, because it can be complex. You have to watch out for rabbit holes when they come up with a whole bunch of ideas and see all the peaks, and the mountains of what the art of the possible really is and how they want to do it right now in the project that you're on. And you have to tell them, no, we'll put it in the backlog and we'll talk about the release plan and how you're going to get there and what the journey will be. Because if you don't, you're going to have a schedule slippage and your project won't end on time. So there's other project archetypes too that I didn't have time to go over today, but they're interesting as well. And my book comes out in March. And if you're interested in this, then I think it'd be good to learn about some other ones. Stick in the mud projects are ones where the client doesn't want to participate at all. And sometimes it's because they are afraid they're going to lose their job during the automation cycle. They just like what they're doing. There's no incentive for them to actually do the work. They might say they can't get the time out of their regular job to devote to your project. And so there are things that you can do to manage that as well. High horse project is like a dictatorship where one person dictates the project and doesn't work as a team with everybody else. So yeah, and I think that's all I have. So be happy to take some questions if anyone has any.
Thanks, Heather. That was so great. Really enjoyed that presentation. And, I think it's really interesting to hear about Salesforce projects and, the patterns of them, and going into automation and how people think that, automation, their jobs are going to get taken, but really it is creating more jobs and just kind of navigating the evolution of tech. We do have one question from Adam. He, I think he had wrote it when you were going over the first slide that you showed. He was saying that he's also, the Rube Goldberg, he was saying he's also heard it referred to as the Frankenstein org. Would you say that's the same?
Yes. Yeah. And so, people have other terms for what they call it, and that's definitely one of them. Sometimes I used to, like years ago, call them spaghetti, because it's just, spaghetti org. It's, it's a big mess, but it was put there for a reason. People didn't really throw code in there. It was just built in a way for their specific use case, and it's hard to modify the code. It's not something that you can go into later and think that you won't hit some limitations, because Salesforce, you share the environment. It's like an apartment building. You're sharing the utilities. You don't have it all to yourself. It's not your own server. So they only let you use a certain amount of the features in it before you've run out of different aspects of it. And if someone's gone in there and just gone wild and said, well, we're just going to build what they ask and we're going to use up everything, and that's what they asked for, it might be working for the first person, but if they have a long-term plan to put a lot of other markets or apps in there, they're going to run into issues, and then they'll need a health check.
Right. Back to cleaning the house and
right, exactly.
all of that.
Yeah.
Yep. In my consultant days, I just two comments. Like, one, the whole afraid of job thing, I had that just being a consultant, right? Where you'd have a high horse project and you're coming in and doing some great things, and all of a sudden your POC shuts you down because you're doing a better job than maybe they were. And combating that is really hard to do. You at that point, you've got to kind of really get back on track with your POC and say, how can we make you look good? How can we make you the hero? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So that can be a really sticky situation as a solution consultant as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are the worst ones to be on, the high horse ones. Those are the most challenging, I guess. Yeah. The explorer ones, you feel like a professor and a teacher and they want to learn, so it's fun. Yeah.
My question was actually going to be kind of spurred by the high horse thing. Like, what can be done if the issue doesn't really even come from the managers, but maybe it isn't even recognized that there's bias, like from the top, like even if it's from like the CEO, when you have I don't know if that would be more stick in the mud or the high horse one, but I mean, what advice would you give for other people encountering those situations, like how best to navigate it without alienating people?
Yeah, well, I mean, the high horse, it depends on who's the person that's acting like the dictator. And if it's the client and it's the person that signed the contract and there's no one to escalate above, then it's just a lot of mitigation and trying to find ways to work. But if it's somebody that is dictating but isn't really a project sponsor, and has no stake in the project, then you can have meetings about roles and responsibilities and who's really in charge of things. And sometimes clients might have like a couple of people who are interested in the project, and they all have different opinions. And in that case, you get them to do like a committee on their side with one person to report back the final decision to the team, that they've all agreed upon. And then that way, if the high horse they have to deal with the high horse on their side, you know, and negotiate with them, and then they'll come back with what it is that we should do. So therefore, you don't, because if you start answering, and this is actually the Hydra, is when you have multiple sponsors. It's like the it's like that serpent with multiple heads in Greek mythology. If that happens, then you will get answers from different people, and you start having swirl, where you're having multiple conversations over and over again, and they're having multiple conversations, and nothing ever gets done. And so that's one where you have to get them to align and have one person come back to give the direction. Like it's the product owner role, but sometimes they don't actually do that. They try to have multiple product owner roles. And you'll see that a lot of times when it's like business and IT are split and they both think they're in charge, you know. But IT, you know, supports business usually. That's the way it's supposed to be. So they're supposed to defer to what the business wants. It gets complicated if they are in charge of the budget. IT is in charge of the budget, and you know, but the business has requirements, and so there's some client management that goes on there. But that's the main gist of it.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I could say I have to laugh. Seeing Jennifer smile and nod and chuckle to herself as you're talking about these different pain points has been entertaining.
Yeah, I've encountered all of them, and it's a big thing. I've been in consulting for a lot of years as well, and I'm to the point where I'm now jaded. I used to be like all happy about things, and then eventually you turn this point as a consultant, and you're like, and you learn how to bite back a little bit. And so I was kind of looking at Adam's comment there of like, how do you handle the chaos when the team is really intimidating and you need health questions? That's all process. I have a health question process checklist, and it's really coming about like, you came to me, I'm the project manager, I'm running the project. Here are the order of operations. And when someone wants to skip over that order of operations, or you have the Hydra effect and you've got 4 people telling you, that's when you sit them all down and say, you know, we can do this, but then what are you taking away? Are you taking away your timeline? Are you taking away this side project? What is your end business result? And if they still budge and they're still not listening, then you do a change order and you make them sign that I'm going to change my original change order. This is where that scope creep comes in. I'm going to sign this change order that we're doing this project, and I am okay with this timeline not being met. And at some point, you really need to get that incorporated, because I've been part of some clients where they will try to stretch that contract out and not pay you, or they'll pay you what they paid you, but you're doing 4 times the work. You cannot get yourself into that, especially if you're doing this on your own as well. Like you've got your own business. You got to make sure that anytime there's scope creep that is excessive, that they sign that change order and that they accept that timeline shifts, because otherwise it'll come back on your butt. So just being really organized, having a process. That health check should be a process that you've developed. There's a ton online that you can start from. A lot of consultants will share them. And then you go through that assessment with them. And if they're difficult, then, email it to them and have them start that way. But I know, Heather, you probably have some more suggestions as well.
I mean, I remember the first time that a client told me that not to worry about the SOW, forget it. And other people have said that it's just a guideline and not really important. Don't ever believe that.
Red flag.
Right. That's a problem. Stick to the SOW and the conversations. If they act like they don't know what you're talking about, have it up and recite from it. Say, I'll have it here and this is what it says. What are we going to do about this? And a change order is not a bad word. I mean, you can have $0 change orders that just align on what it is that you've agreed to. That's different from the original change order. So it's just important to normalize those types of conversations and not to make them scary for people to have.
Exactly. You want your cake or your ice cream. Can't have both, right? Got to pick one, because that's what we agreed upon. One dessert.
Yeah.
I honestly can't thank you enough, Heather and Jennifer, for sharing a little bit of your journey with us tonight.